Edward Donald Slovik grew up poor in Detroit, stealing bread before he learned to read properly. By 16, he had a police record for theft, but never violence, just survival in hard times. He married young, worked odd jobs, and tried to stay out of trouble during the Depression. When war came, he registered for the draft, but hoped his record would keep him home. Instead, the Army classified him 1A, fit for service, despite his fears and past mistakes. He begged for non-combat duty, citing anxiety, but was assigned to an infantry replacement unit anyway. In April 1944, he shipped out to Europe, clutching a memory of his wife, Antoinette. He had never fired a rifle in combat and prayed he never would have to aim. His unit trained in England, but Eddie stayed quiet, watching others joke about the front lines. He thought of Antoinette daily, promising himself he'd return, but his hope faded as D-Day passed. In August 1944, his unit shipped to France to replace losses from the Normandy campaign. He saw burned tanks, dead horses, and villages reduced to rubble. His fear deepened with every mile. He told his sergeant he couldn't fight, but was told to man up or ship out. On October 9, 1944, he walked away from his unit during a quiet night in France. He turned himself in days later, handing a verbal confession to a kitchen orderly at base camp. He believed he'd serve prison time, never imagining death as punishment for desertion. Over 20,000 U.S. soldiers were sentenced for desertion. Only 49 received death penalties in Europe. But in late 1944, with the Battle of the Bulge looming, generals wanted to set an example. Slovik's case was randomly selected, not for severity, but because his file was on top. On November 11, 1944, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. His appeal denied instantly. Slovik spoke his plea to a chaplain, asking God and Army for one more chance. The chaplain relayed his words up the chain, but no general would meet the condemned man. Antoinette waited in Detroit, unaware her husband's fate had already been sealed in silence. No one told her he'd been sentenced. Military policy required silence until after the execution. His appeals passed through 7 offices, each commander signed without reading, trusting the system above mercy. Even Eisenhower's headquarters received the file but stamped confirmed without discussion, debate, or second thought. The Army needed deterrence, not justice. Slovik was chosen not for what he did, but when he did it. December 1944 brought panicked German tanks rolled through Ardennes, and discipline was collapsing at the front. Generals believed public execution would stop mass desertions. Slovik became the symbol they needed to kill. No other deserter was executed, only Slovik on Christmas Eve to maximize fear and visibility. He asked for a Catholic priest, for last rites, for a moment of peace before death. The priest stayed with him for hours, speaking softly as snow fell outside the stone walls. Slovik wrote nothing. He spoke his final words aloud, knowing no paper would carry them home. He asked the priest to tell Antoinette he was sorry and that he loved her always. But military censors blocked all personal messages. His last words never left the prison walls. On December 23rd, he was moved to the execution site, a walled garden near Sainte-Marie-aux-Mines. The site was chosen for privacy, but close enough to the front to send a message. 12 enlisted men were ordered to form the firing squad. None volunteered, all obeyed under threat. They were told, "Aim true. This is for the morale of every man in Europe." Slovik would die at dawn on Christmas Eve alone, unheard, and erased before the world celebrated peace. At 6 a.m., guards woke Slovik. He dressed quietly, refusing blindfold. wanting to face death with eyes open. He ate no breakfast, drank only water, and asked for one final moment to pray alone. The priest returned, placing a hand on his shoulder. No words, only presence in the silence. At 9 a.m., soldiers led him to a truck, his last ride through snow-covered French countryside. Villagers watched from windows. None knew why a U.S. soldier was being driven to his death on Christmas Eve. The truck stopped at a walled garden, its high stone walls hiding what would happen inside. Inside, 12 riflemen stood in line, their breath visible in the bitter morning air. An officer pointed to a blank wall. Slovik would stand there, back to the firing squad. He refused to turn his back. He faced the squad, standing tall, eyes open, mouth closed. The officer gave the command, "Ready, aim." Rifles lifted in unison, barrels glinting in overcast light. Slovik did not flinch. His final act was defiance wrapped in quiet, human dignity. "Fire!" 12 shots rang out at 10:04 a.m., echoing off stone walls into silent winter air. He fell forward instantly. No dramatic collapse, just a body hitting snow with a soft thud. A medical officer checked for pulse, declared him dead, and covered the body with a rough wool blanket. The firing squad stood silent. No cheers, no relief, only shame beneath their helmets on Christmas morning. Officers ordered them to disperse. No discussion, no reflection, just return to duty as if nothing happened. The body was loaded onto a truck destination, a temporary grave marked only by a number. No bell tolled. No prayer was read aloud. Christmas Eve continued as if justice had been served. Meanwhile, families across America hung stockings, baked pies, and sang carols, unaware a man died for desertion. The Army filed one report: execution completed per order. No name, no reason, no remembrance given. Antoinette Slovik received a telegram on January 10, 1945. Her husband had died in service to his country. She didn't know he'd been executed. Officials called it killed in action to spare her shame and pain. She wore black for a year, lit no candles, and kept Eddie's photo turned face down on the dresser. In 1948, a neighbor mentioned Eddie's name. Antoinette heard the word execution and refused to believe it. She wrote to the War Department, but her letters vanished into bureaucracy, unanswered for months, then years. She visited government offices in person. Clerks turned her away, saying the case was closed, the file sealed forever. She refused to accept silence. Every year, on December 24th, she left a single white flower at City Hall. No one acknowledged it. Officials removed the flower before noon, as if her grief threatened official memory. She worked odd jobs, saved pennies, and kept Eddie's memory alive in a heart the world tried to silence. In 1953, a newspaper journalist heard her story, wanted to write the truth, but editors killed the piece. Too controversial, they said. America doesn't execute its own soldiers, ignoring the one it had already erased. Antoinette kept fighting. She spoke to veterans, priests, even congressmen, but no one had power to reopen the case. She never remarried, never moved from Detroit, never let the world forget Eddie was more than a statistic. In 1960, she learned the truth. Eddie was the only American executed for desertion in World War II. She collapsed that day, not from shock, but from 30 years of carrying a truth no one would hear. She hired a lawyer in 1963, filed to have Eddie's record changed from dishonorable to honorable discharge. The Army refused, citing finality of wartime justice, even though every other deserter had been pardoned or forgotten. She appealed to President Johnson. His office sent a form letter thanking her for her service to memory. Antoinette died in 1978, never seeing justice, but never stopping her fight for the man she loved. Her gravestone reads only Antoinette Slovik, but her legacy was a widow's love that outlasted official silence. For 30 years, Slovik's execution stayed secret-locked in military archives, erased from public memory and history books. Then in 1974, a writer named William Bradford Hiei published a book that shattered the silence forever. He interviewed firing squad members, officers, priests, and uncovered a truth the Army never wanted the public to know. The book sold millions. Americans were horrified that their nation executed a terrified boy on Christmas Eve. Veterans wept. Families debated. Congress demanded answers. Why was Slovik the only one executed for desertion? The Army admitted the truth, but claimed it was necessary to maintain discipline during the Battle of the Bulge. Critics called it cowardice punishing one man for a fear thousands shared, but never confessed aloud. In 1974, a TV movie dramatized Slovik's life starring Martin Sheen and brought the story into American living rooms. Viewers called radio shows, wrote op-eds, and demanded Slovik's record be changed to honor his suffering, not punish it. Veterans groups split. Some called him a coward. Others said he was a victim of a system that needed a scapegoat. Antoinette, still alive, watched the movie set silently through the credits, then turned off the television without a word. She knew the truth wasn't in the dramatization. It was in Eddie's fear, his plea, his unanswered letters. The public outcry grew. Petitioners gathered thousands of signatures, demanding President Ford pardon Slovik posthumously and restore his honor. The White House received boxes of mail, but Ford's advisors warned pardoning Slovik might dishonor soldiers who fought through fear. In 1977, Ford denied the pardon, citing the gravity of desertion in wartime and the need for military order. The decision crushed advocates, but it also cemented Slovik's place as a symbol of justice denied by bureaucracy. Historians began re-examining wartime discipline, asking whether fear should ever be punished as treason in the fog of war. Slovik's name entered textbooks, not as a coward, but as a cautionary tale about power, fear, and mercy. His story became a benchmark when America debates military justice. Slovik's execution is always the ghost in the room. The truth was buried for decades, but once unearthed, it forced a nation to confront its own moral silence. Eddie Slovik remains the only American soldier executed for desertion in the entire Second World War. Over 20,000 were convicted of desertion, 49 sentenced to die, but only Slovik faced the firing squad. Why him? Not because he was the worst, but because he was the first to refuse silence. He spoke his fear aloud, while others hid theirs, and that honesty made him dangerous to military order. In 1987, after decades of advocacy, his remains were moved from an unmarked grave to Michigan. He was buried beside Antoinette, finally together, finally at peace, finally remembered, not as a coward, but a man. The headstone reads only his name and dates, no rank, no charge, no judgment from a system that failed him. Every December 24th, visitors leave white flowers, a silent apology from a nation that chose discipline over compassion. No president has pardoned him, but his story lives as a warning about the cost of absolute authority. Modern soldiers study his case not to condemn, but to understand the line between fear and duty. His execution file remains classified in parts, some truths still too uncomfortable for full public reckoning even today. Yet his name echoes in courtrooms, classrooms, and Congress whenever justice clashes with the machinery of war. He was not a hero, but he was human, and his humanity was punished as a crime. In a war that killed 50 million, one execution stands out, not for scale, but for silence. No fanfare marked his death, no bell tolled, only snow fell on a garden in France. And for 30 years, America forgot him, not out of malice, but out of shame and convenience. But memory is stubborn. Antoinette's love, a writer's courage, and a nation's conscience brought him back to light. Today, his story teaches that justice without mercy is merely power dressed in uniform. Eddie Slovik was the only one executed, but he represents thousands who trembled in silence and survived. His name endures not as a warning to soldiers, but as a plea for compassion in the fog of war.